Welcome to Integration Nation. I'm Dee Daniels for Allison Sullivan and Associates Integrative Mental Health. Both and.
That's right. It's not just either or. It's both and. If you're a client of mine listening, right now you're probably rolling your eyes saying, oh, I know what's coming next, because this is a big piece of the work I do with a lot of people in the practice. It's called How We Move Away from Dichotomous Thinking.
Big words, big words. And I know you're going to detail exactly what that means. And I'm so excited about this episode because I'm going to be taking a lot of notes. I have a tendency to go into the black or white kind of thinking, and I really have to pay attention to that. So I know we're going to talk more about that coming up on this episode. Very excited. At the end of this episode, you're going to want to hang around for the Q&A session, answering your questions that you've sent in to Allison, and she'll be addressing some of those. You can always ask questions and hit us up on Instagram or on Facebook.
Or the website. We're really accessible through the website. You can just go to the contact us and shoot us whatever comments or questions you have. If you like what you're hearing, if it's relevant, if it's meaningful for you, then please leave us a 5-star rating and review in whatever platform you're listening to, whether that's Spotify, Google Play, iTunes, or Apple Podcasts, YouTube even, LinkedIn. Just let us know that you're enjoying the content, and we will continue to meet you where you are.
Always some great, fantastic services that are available here. Always new workshops going on and things that you can get involved in: aromatherapy, massage, body work, individual therapy, of course. And it all can be found at allisonsintegrativehealth.org and by signing up for the newsletter as well. So both and, not either or. Mm-hmm. It's a very dangerous type of thinking, even though we all can fall into that sometimes, depending on the circumstance or situation.
Yeah, and it's really, a lot of our society is really organized around artificial binaries, whatever they are. Yes, no, black, white, wrong or right, man, woman, in, out. The pull for that is so understandable. So that's what I want to address first, because it's really comforting, I think, really security-based to think that there's a concrete, simple choice to make. It's either yes or it's no. It's wrong or it's right. If only things fit into those discrete categories.
But they never do.
They don't. They do not. Generally, especially when we're kids, they fit into those discrete categories. We don't hit other people.
Right.
Things like that. But once we become adults, the situations we find ourselves in relationships, in our families, in jobs, in our, what's going on within ourselves. It's more about the gray area. It's even making decisions about things in our lives. We often find that there's conflicting feelings or several different aspects that we need to consider. Rarely do we find ourselves in a circumstance where it's a very neat and tidy either or.
I know at the beginning of this, you kind of mentioned some of the categories that we can always find ourselves wanting to put something into.
Yep.
It's got to belong in this category: man, woman, in or out, that sort of thing. Was just having a conversation with someone the other day about this can also apply to gender.
Yes.
And how we're asking ourselves the question today of why do we do these things like gender reveal parties where people are misgendered all the time, and
Yes.
why are we forcing ourselves into that where we're starting before the child's even born and categorizing things like that? This can really apply to so many different things.
Yes, and I think anybody who's listening, whether you're a first-time listener or a seasoned listener, you can pretty readily start to see how this is showing up in your life. In small, medium, and large ways. It's a really foundation organizing way of perception that really doesn't give us the benefit that we're looking for. It doesn't securely ground us in a fixed reality. That's just not the way life is. Sexual orientation is not either or. It's a continuum. Gender identity actually isn't either or. It's a continuum. A lot of times it's a 40-60, a 70-30, a 55-45, a 49-51. And when we start to really open up to those things as both and in our lives, whether it's a decision about a job opportunity, a move, a relationship, a hobby, our more serious things like our sexual orientation, our gender identity, when we can open up beyond an overly simplistic and artificial one choice or the other, things start to make more sense and feel more fitting. And that's where a lot of the mindfulness-based principles that we've talked about come into play, because to be able to do that, we really have to get comfortable with not knowing. We have to get comfortable with allowing things to be messy. We have to get comfortable more with asking questions of ourselves and reflecting and allowing the confusion to be there while we're sorting through. It's kind of like, so the visual that just came to mind is if you just take everything out of the dryer and expect that it's going to be shirts or socks, that's not going to work out well for you because it's going to be a combination of things. If you just pick up each piece, you'll see what it is, and based on seeing what it is and how you feel in relationship to it, you'll be able to decide what to do with it. So if it's a button-down blouse that you pick up, you'll think, oh, well, I wear this in this circumstance, and this circumstance, sometimes this other circumstance, but I'm going to hang this up. Oh, here's one sock that I found, but I don't know where the other sock is, so I'm just going to hold on to this sock and wait till I find the other sock. Or an even better analogy, I think, is we've all been in situations where you're taking multiple choice tests, where you read the question and then you start to look down the list of answers and you read the answer for A and you're like, yeah, maybe a little. You read the answer for B and you're like, yeah, that pretty much gets it, but not quite. You read the C answer and you're like, oh gosh, I don't know which one fits more, but they're not really totally right. And then you read D and it says all of the above. That's really what we're talking about, is the all of the above, because the adult situations that we're in are really about all of the above.
That's so true. And at the beginning, you mentioned this very large word, dichotomous thinking. And how does that play in? What does that mean?
So let me give you a common scenario that unfolds in here that I think people will be able to relate to. Let's say people are in a relationship, in a committed relationship, and things have been difficult for a while. Maybe somebody has had a job change. Maybe there's some other factor going on. Maybe there was a pay cut or some kind of stressor, but all of a sudden it's different than it was. And there's more conflict and nobody's comfortable. So somebody's going to come to therapy and start to figure that out. And sometimes dichotomous thinking shows up in that scenario with somebody saying, I've got to decide if I want in or out of this. And that's really actually a lot of times a call for just more comfort. If I can figure out if I want in or out, then I'll be comfortable. That's the lure, if you will, of dichotomous thinking. If I can just pick one of them, then I'll be comfortable. And that's not really reflective of the reality. The reality is more along the lines of, if you come in and ask yourself, I want to figure out what's going on in my relationship and who I am in this and what I want and how I can be the partner that my values and beliefs reflect, then that opens up so many more possibilities about choices, opportunities, strategies. And underneath all of that is a notion of getting comfortable with just not knowing, because we can't artificially pick an outcome and then think that we're going to feel comfortable about that.
That is so true. I'm thinking about so many things, including I can't tell you how many times I have been in that situation where I've thought, well, if I just know what's going to happen, if I just could know what is going to happen in this situation, then I would, my anxiety would go away, or I would stop stressing about this. Not true, by the way. Mm-hmm. Even when you do know something or think you know something, it likely is not going to go in that direction that you think you know. So even the knowing or the think you know.
Yeah, or if you pick one of these things, if you say, okay, if I just pick a choice, then I'll feel better. Well, you might get some relief in picking, but that doesn't mean that the other aspects of the situation are going to be resolved just because you picked an option. Because maybe you haven't even considered all of the other options. So let's talk about another place this shows up a lot is when I work with people in their early 20s or sometimes even like early 30s because of a shift in their lives, and they start thinking about, I don't know what I want to do. I have to pick something. It either has to be this or that. I got a degree in this, so I have to use that in this way or this way. That really can amp up people's anxiety and get them really stuck in overthinking and overanalyzing and self-doubt, when actually maybe it's time for something completely outside of any of the scenarios that they're setting up in their mind. Maybe it's more reflective of, I like this aspect and this aspect of the industry I'm in, and I'm also really passionate about this other thing that seems unrelated. And I want to invest energy and time in both of those, but I don't know how to do that. That's more both and thinking rather than either or. Oh, I have to pick this thing I love and really make no money, or I have to do this thing I'm not connected to and make more money. That's not really going to get us where we want to be, which is kind of a grounded sense of satisfaction in our lives with meaning.
And it's not going to be fulfilling.
It can't be because it's disconnected from so many other aspects we're not thinking about.
I was thinking about, family relationships. And when you have a negative family relationship with maybe somebody or a parent or someone in your family that things are not, you don't have the relationship that you want.
I don't think anyone can relate to that, Dee.
I see that. But it's something that you've helped me through too in working with some of my family stuff, in that you don't have to label that relationship as all negative, all bad.
Yes.
When you think to yourself, because you're struggling in between.
Yeah.
You don't have to go into one of those categories. It can be, this is a struggle.
Yes.
And
yes,
there's also some very good loving parts about these people in my life too.
I'm so glad you brought this point up, because this permeates every aspect of the work we do here. People need to resolve their feelings about different relationships in their lives, and a lot of times there's this pressure to split. If they've done some harmful things or some mean-spirited things or just some hurtful things, people think, oh, okay, well, that person is bad then. However, oftentimes, now there are some cases where there's some pretty significant abuse and there's some pretty consistently toxic relationships that are problematic for people. But a lot of times there's just kind of this garden variety misattunement that happens, where there's aspects of people's behavior that is really insensitive, really misattuned, really rejecting. And then there's also some aspects of the relationship that seem really compassionate, that seem really supportive and encouraging. And it's really hard for people when they come at that in a dichotomous way to reconcile that. How can this person be kind and compassionate and loving to me in these ways and seem so mean-spirited or dismissive or just not there for me in these other ways? That's so typical in difficult relationships.
For some reason goes against everything like we learned at the beginning. We have to unlearn that.
Yes, we have to really open up to that. I think that makes it more approachable for people, is just to open up to that. And so, being the visual person that I am, when I think about this concept, I think about the difference between, so dichotomous thinking to me looks like a tree with a tree trunk, and then just two pretty thick limbs that come off of that. There's very few trees I've ever actually seen that look like that.
Right,
And they're
exactly.
certainly not really healthy trees if you do see them like that. They're really troubled in some way. They're struggling.
Right. Right.
They're struggling in a fundamental way. So a both and approach is looking at a tree that has a solid trunk, and then that trunk expands into all kinds of branches and limbs off of those branches and emerging, teeny tiny twigs off of those limbs. When you stand back and you look at that tree and all of the possibilities and all of the connections, that, at least to me, when I look at a tree like that, I see health. That branch with a lot of trees, a lot of connections, a lot of things that are touching and overlapping and a part of. When we can open up to the situations and the relationships in our lives from that place, I don't know about you, but when I do that, I feel more relief. I don't feel that pressure to pick something that doesn't really reflect what the situation is. When I can think of it from that place, it seems easier to really be in the middle of different aspects of something. So maybe, in those difficult family relationships, if from a both and perspective, that becomes, let's just say a brother, for instance. My brother really says some biting comments to me during family get-togethers and seems to really devalue my career. However, he's also really connected as an uncle, and he seems really supportive of our family as a whole. So he's both and in that way. And how do I want to approach that? That's so much different emotionally than, because my brother did this, he's awful and I don't want to be a part of his life. Or because my brother does this, I can't pay attention to any of this other stuff that really does hurt my feelings. That's where dichotomous thinking really sticks people. That both and approach allows people to say, okay, how am I going to address this problematic behavior? Because I really want to support the other aspects of the relationship that matter too.
I love that visual of the tree, by the way. That totally fantastic visual. I know you and I both love to paint, and
Yes.
that is one thing. If I could make a suggestion to anyone, if you ever thought about picking up a paintbrush and trying to just paint a tree, simple tree, that will give you this, just to see the strokes of how many branches and limbs and
how they connect.
And some in front of each other and some behind each other, and then they move sometimes according to where they are growing and how they're growing and how the sun is hitting them. And
exactly.
it will really open your eyes to this whole idea of moving away from the black and white and getting
Yes.
into a both and.
Yes, absolutely.
When we were talking at the beginning about this process of black and white, and you were mentioning the gender role and the man-woman role and the inner-out role and the things that we all think about and kind of come across in our daily lives. I was thinking about some of the things that we learned when we were kids that, like girls play with these toys, boys play with these toys.
Yes.
These are
Yes.
things that I
Yes.
think a lot of people are trying to shift their focus from when they were a kid. They learned that, well, only girls do this or only boys do this, and how damaging that kind of thinking really can be.
That's such, in social work, we would call that a macro lens. That's such a great lens of how far-reaching this kind of thinking is and the implications of that. It really is such an artificial way to kind of relate to people and relate to experiences that doesn't reflect the actual person, the actual circumstance. Kids are kids, regardless of what their body parts are. A lot of kids like to wear dresses and play with dinosaurs. They like to play with cars and also paint and draw. They like to dress up. Kids like to do all kinds of things, and when we artificially decide what's okay, because of something that really isn't relevant, it tells the child that they are limited. And then that starts to reinforce a limited mindset, not only about who they are, but what's possible.
The opportunity for growth with this is really huge. I mean, really huge in your relationships, not only, with your family members or your kids. The opportunity for growth just with this different kind of thinking, this both and, is huge.
There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about this or apply it to my own life several times a day. It can be in a simple way, like I have to drive to work this way or that way. Then I'll catch myself and I'll say, well, who says? How about you go a different way? Or how about if you go to work using something different? Who says you have to drive to work? And something that simple opens up my thinking to help me to understand the plane of possibility, as Dan Siegel calls it, is what's limitless within all of us. So no matter what circumstance we're in, no matter, what aspect of our relationship with ourselves we're dealing with, and that's particularly relevant at all types of life transitions, developmental stages that we all go through across the lifespan. When we can approach it, I'm both nervous and excited. I'm both uncertain and hopeful. And, anything else in between, it helps us kind of join with the process of the unfolding of that experience without putting all of these ridiculous expectations on ourselves.
Are you ready for Q&A?
Ooh, I'm always ready for Q&A.
It's time for Q&A. All right, so this is really exciting. We are so thrilled that you're asking questions and leaving your comments and sharing your thoughts on Instagram, on Facebook, on the website, over email. You can always do that. And so we've taken some of your questions, and Allison is going to address some of those. And I want to start off with Stephanie. Stephanie has a great story. Now, she was referring to one of our previous episodes. This was the one at the beginning of the year about the awkward beauty of beginnings. You remember that one?
Love that episode.
Such a great episode, and a lot of people were touched by that and really given some just great motivation to be a beginner and love the awkwardness and
the possibility.
Exactly. There it is.
Yes.
There it is. So here's Stephanie's story and question. Stephanie says, first off, Allison, thank you for doing the podcast. It means a lot, and I love it. Talking about the awkwardness of beginnings, I am definitely a beginner this year. I am going through a divorce. I have kids involved in the divorce. So far, so good with the process, but I can tell this is going to be a game changer. I can tell that I'm going to be starting new things all year long. My relationships will change and my thinking will change, and I'm hoping to keep all of that very positive. Do you have any advice?
Wow. First, let me say, Stephanie, thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for trusting us and trusting yourself enough to pose that question. That took a lot of courage, and I'm sure so many people listening can relate to that. So let me just say this, that's one of those huge life transitions we were just referencing. That impacts every aspect of identity and rhythm and comfort and, just sense of what is and what is going to be. So, in the spirit of the awkwardness of beginnings, I'm going to encourage you to be compassionate with yourself as this unfolds. I'm not going to pretend that I know the particulars of your circumstance, the particular challenges, the losses, the aspects of grief in that. So let me just say that whatever you experience along the way is probably a really important part of the process for you. And I'm going to encourage you to link in with the supports that are probably around you in your community, both professional supports and those natural support systems that people often have in friends and family. And most importantly, to be compassionate with yourself along the way. these life transitions don't unfold neatly and they don't unfold gracefully. We kind of just stumble through them one step at a time.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Stephanie, for the question very much. Rita had a question, and she was talking about the self-care episode. And she said the self-care episode hit me in all the right places, Allison.
Awesome.
She said, I'm actually 62 years old, and I'm going through some life changes myself. And I'm, of course, getting older and have health changes, but I'm also caring for my elderly parent at home.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
So self-care can sometimes go to the very bottom of my list, and I have a hard time putting my needs above others when I know that I probably should. Any advice you can give would be helpful. Thank you.
So, Rita, thank you so much for taking the time in your schedule, which, has got to be really demanding. I work with a lot of people in caretaking roles and a lot of people sandwiched, if you will, caring for parents and other family members while still being actively involved in their children's lives. And so there's a lot of pressures and a lot of demands. And so I just want to say, I think you taking the time to listen to the podcast on self-care is an act of self-care. And it actually is an example of what we were talking about in that episode, because we were really focusing on self-care doesn't have to be some extravagant thing just outside of your reach. Self-care is really about be where you are, start where you are, and figure out how to care for yourself in those circumstances. And I think by you listening to the podcast and taking the time to send us a question, that's an act of self-care. So I'm going to encourage you to keep doing the same thing. And like we talked about in that episode, find pockets for yourself where you sit down and maybe you have a cup of green tea and you say, you know what, that was really hard. Today has been really busy. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to look out the window and I'm going to drink my tea. Finding those pockets is a really important way that we can start to care for ourselves more mindfully.
Love that question. Thank you, Rita. And James had a simple question. He said, I would love to start using aromatherapy. I know that you have some workshops on that and I've never done it before, but it sounds like it could be helpful to me.
Okay, so great. If you are local in the Fredericksburg area, James, then we have aromatherapy workshops monthly for free here at the office. The best way to stay up to date about the dates and the topics of those is to either say, well, both in the spirit of this episode, not either or, both and.
Both and.
Subscribe to our news and events on our website, and also like our Facebook page, because we announce the aromatherapy events and workshops on our events page on the Facebook page. And we also tend to send out emails to our email subscriber list about what those topics are going to be and when they are. They do tend to be on the second Thursday of every month from 7 to 8, but we do have a few that don't really adhere to that this year. So you're going to want to check that Facebook page.
If you like what you're hearing, give a rating. If you love what you're hearing, share it with everyone you know and tell them they must listen to this podcast. Integration Nation and the website Allison'sIntegrativeHealth.org. Sign up for the newsletter and you'll get some great information there. And of course, as always, Allison will meet you where you are today. Allison Sullivan and Associates Integrative Mental Health Team is located in beautiful, historic downtown Fredericksburg, Virginia, and at Allison'sIntegrativeHealth.org. New and exciting workshops are available to you that will give you personal attention to meet your needs right where you are on your journey. Sign up for our newsletter to be the first to know when registration opens for workshops like Aromatherapy 101. Here's how you can discover to use aromatherapy to support your health. Did you know that a blend of frankincense, peppermint, and lemongrass supports wisdom, optimism, and it will help you release unhealthy attachments? This is where you can learn how to support your mental, emotional, and physical health with the Essential Oils workshops available to you monthly for no charge. Come meet the team. Schedule your session today for psychotherapy, hypnotherapy, yoga, and massage, and begin restoring yourself in mind, body, and spirit. If you'd like to call, the number is 540-907-0991 and online at Allison'sIntegrativeHealth.org. As Allison always says, self-care will save your life. Let go and lean in.